Hello and welcome to Broken Entertainment. So today we're going to do my review of Empire of Silence by Christopher Ruocchio. And this is a book and an author that I was put on to by one of my subscribers. And it's been a really interesting listen because, as usual, any of these books I review are probably an audiobook. This one is no exception. Very much different from what I normally listen to in the sense of science fiction, at least. And it is, Christopher Ruocchio himself describes himself as a science fantasy author, and that's a very accurate, I think, description. You know, a lot of times when we think of science fiction, we think too often of hard science fiction, of stuff where you almost kind of get like a science lesson while you're reading it. And that definitely is not the case here. Now, he does draw on a lot of real world concepts of long distance space travel that he uses, but it's all very just kind of an accepted part of the universe. And he doesn't go into huge depth as to how it works, which is fine, unless, you know, if you're a hard science fiction person, then you might struggle with that. But if you're not strictly hard science fiction, it works very well. If you consider it akin almost to a magic system in fantasy, not in that it's hand-waved, but that it's very well done, very well laid out, but he doesn't bog himself down with the minutia of explaining things that really you just need to know exist and function, right? So the big example of that is they have these stasis pods that they sleep in while they're traveling between worlds, and you know that they have warp drive, but you don't know the details about the warp drive. It clearly goes some amount of faster than light based on the travel times, but it doesn't go into detail because that detail is not necessary for the story that he's telling. Now, you know, the stasis pods, you know how they work in the sense of the character gets in one, you get all of that from his perspective, which is actually really interesting in how that works, but you don't get a full, like, scientific explanation of what's going on, and that's fine. It actually fits the story very well. This story is first person, which is something I typically struggle with. I'm not a big fan of first person, but I think in some instances, and this is one of them, I think it works very well. So Empire of Silence is the first book in a series of books called the Sun Eater series, and it is basically the memoirs of the main character. So you know going in, and you'll even see it in the description, so this isn't spoilers, and we'll go over the description in a minute. Not spoilers. You know going in, the main character is going to achieve certain things, and certain things are going to happen. But it's more, I would say it's more character driven than it is plot driven. It certainly has a plot, that's not what I'm saying. But there's certain tensions that exist in some books that aren't in this, because you know he's going to achieve certain things, and you know he's not going to die in the book, and so on. So we'll get into the description here really quick, and then I'll give you a review that will be as spoiler-free as I can manage. Sometimes I can't help myself, but I will try to make it spoiler-free. So, it is 624 pages long. It's about 28 hours, I believe, on Audible. Very great narration, by the way. Hadrian Marlowe, a man revered as a hero and despised as a murderer, chronicles his tale on the galaxy-spanning debut of the Sun Eater series, merging the best of space opera and epic fantasy. If you are a 40K fan, you'll like this book. It's not as wild and carefree as 40K, and it's not as dark as 40K, but it kind of approaches the science and fantasy aspects in a similar way. And the world building itself is a little bit Brandon Sanderson-esque. It's very good. It's very solid, and he does an excellent job of incorporating it into the story without pulling you out. But anyway, it was not his war. The galaxy remembers him as a hero, the man who burned every last alien sea elson from the sky. They remember him as a monster, the devil who destroyed a sun, casually annihilating 4 billion human lives, even the Emperor himself, against Imperial orders. But Hadrian was not a hero, he was not a monster, he was not even a soldier. On the wrong planet at the right time for the best reasons, Hadrian Marlowe starts down a path that can only end in fire. He flees his father and a future as a torturer, only to be left stranded on a strange backwater world, forced to fight as a gladiator and navigate the intrigues of a foreign planetary court. Hadrian must fight a war he did not start, for an empire he does not love, against an enemy he will never understand. So, first immediate impressions with this book. The narration is great. Excellent job. And the first person perspective actually works pretty well for it. There's, like I said, it's one of those things I struggle with. And I think it's because I've seen it handled so poorly so often. But it's done very well. And it pulls you into the story rather than what it usually does for me is pull me out of it. And I have a hard time picturing this book written in third person. There's something about it that it just works with the first person perspective. And the character will occasionally sort of sidestep and he'll talk about events, essentially foreshadow things, because he's writing this memoir and it's basically notes in the margins, essentially. And it works really well. I really enjoyed the world building. It was very casual in some respects, but it was only casual in the areas where it needed to be. In other words, the work was there, but you didn't need to know the exacting specifics of how high matter swords work. You didn't need to know the exacting specifics of how the stasis chambers work. And you get the feeling from this book that a lot of information is going to be coming out over the course of the next couple of books. And you're not just going to be left wondering on any of these things either. It's just that from the perspective of the character, those things don't really matter. You know, he's telling you the story of his life, and specifically in Empire of Silence, how he got into the position that he ends up in the following books. Now, I read some reviews, as I often do. I read the negative reviews of things before I buy them. And one of the repeated things I saw was that the book doesn't really get you into the war plot until the very end. And that is accurate. What it does do is an excellent job of setting up the universe and the character. Because this first book is really about the character and his situation and explaining how he gets from where he starts his life to the events that he's writing about in the memoirs. And in that sense, like I said, it's very character driven. There's a lot of political intrigue. There's a lot of court politics. So if you enjoy those things, you'll definitely enjoy that. There is some combat. It's well done. And there is a mix of different aspects of different cultures that I think works very well. In particular, there's the religion, which I won't go into much detail on here for spoiler issues, but the religion combines aspects of different Earth religions, including having minarets on the church buildings, and it is not an existing religion. It is not Islam. It is not Christianity. It is its own future thing. And the great thing about it borrowing different things from Earth is that it gives you that feeling of this is way in the future where they're looking back And when they're establishing their religions, when they're building their buildings, they're taking things from different cultures in their past and applying them. There's a lot of Roman stuff. There's a lot of Old English, depending on where you go and what specifically you're talking about. There's some Turkic stuff. That all works very well for a civilization that it makes a civilization feel old. Like, you look at our civilization now and you see a lot of Western societies will draw influence from the Roman Empire for architecture, for names, stuff like that. And in the East, they do that as well in different regions for different countries and different ancient civilizations. So it's a very human thing. And since you have most of humanity united in this one civilization, all of it being meshed together makes a lot of sense and works very, very well. The combat aspects are somewhat limited, so if you're going into this wanting a huge amount of combat, you're not going to get that. But the combat you do get is very rewarding. The other negative I saw people mention was they said, oh, this character looks down on himself all the time. He beats himself up. There's elements of that, but it's not, I don't think it's overdone. And a lot of times when he's getting on himself, it's for good reason. You know, this is not a character that walks through life and everything's easy and he never makes mistakes. He makes a lot of mistakes in this book. And that's what moves him from event to event, essentially. This is very much a guy, you get the sense that later on he's going to be very, very powerful. But here, early in his life, he's at the mercy almost of other people a lot. And you see him trying to struggle against that, as a lot of people would. Especially, you know, he's pretty young. And that's pretty classic human thing, is when you're starting to come of age, you start to struggle against your restraints. So, I think in a lot of ways I felt like this book was a much better version of Shadow of the Conqueror. So, Shadow of the Conqueror takes some serious risks that I absolutely respect the author for doing, but it is a debut novel, and he kind of, it's maybe a little overdone, put it that way. I don't want to get into a full review of Shadow of the Conqueror. I've already done that. But this takes similar elements without taking them to anywhere near the extremes. And, you know, you read the description. This guy kills 4 billion people. But you almost immediately connect with the character. You feel for the character. This is a character who is trying to do good things, trying to do the right thing. And you got to see through his story how he gets into that position of killing 4 billion people, essentially. And he's writing in his memoir from a position of regret in some way. And this book, you know, it's kind of a book that you finish, and I kind of had to just sit on it for a little bit and just kind of think about it, which is good. That's definitely a good thing. I've had to do that with some Brandon Sanderson books. And if I had to pick the thing it does the best, I really think, outside of the world building, it's the characterization. I immediately connected with Hadrian Marlowe. And a lot of the people that he found as villains, I also found as villains. And that is exactly what you want, especially in a first-person narrative perspective. If I were going to point to something, I think it would be a negative perspective on this, is it is a lot of setup. You get that feeling pretty quickly in the book that this is a lot of setup for future narratives. And that can put some people off. I think the strong characterization makes up for a lot of that. And the fact that a lot of what's going on is pretty interesting makes up for a lot of that. But you definitely are like, yeah, this is this is really more of a setup than it is the first step. And that's okay. But that is definitely a thing. I think if I were going to pick anything in this book that would turn people off from it, it's that. And I've seen that in negative reviews. And while it's not something that turned me off from the book, I could see it doing that to others. To me, it hooked me onto this character, and I want to see what he does next. So I think I would say if you start to listen to it or read it and you start feeling like, oh, hey, this is just set up, give it a shot. Go all the way through it. It's a long book, I know, but I think by the end, most people are going to be pretty connected to the character and they're going to want to read more rather than feeling like they just kind of watched a prequel in book form. So yeah, definitely give it a shot. Now, as far as anything else, his prose is pretty good. It's pretty strong. I'm not a big prose person. By that I mean some people are huge prose fans. Like they'll forgive a lot if you just write pretty. And to me, if the story's not there, it can be as pretty as you want it to be. I don't really care. But the story is there. And the prose, actually, initially, I was kind of like, what's going on here? And then like, oh, it's a little bit different prose that I'm used to. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's a good thing to be introduced to different styles of writing, particularly if you're going to be an author yourself. But even as a reader, it's a very important thing to do. And I think by the first couple chapters, it reads really, really well. And you don't necessarily get hugely in-depth, lengthy descriptions. You get very visceral visual descriptions. And it works very well for the narrative. There's never a point where you're not sure what you're looking at. Because the way the prose is set up, it just really helps you picture it mentally, and I think that's awesome. As far as overall story goes, it follows kind of a Brandon Sanderson rhythm model, is what I call it, where you don't have the 3-act play, right? You have rhythms where you go up and then down and then up and then down, where a story peaks and comes down and then another story starts and comes down and then another story starts, and you have that throughout the course of the book. And I like that a lot with Brandon Sanderson, and I like it a lot here. I think it works really well for these longer books because it's hard to maintain that 3-act structure over a long period of time like that. So having multiple story arcs that connect together to form an overall narrative of the character's life works very, very well for it. So if you have read this book, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Please don't spoil anything for anyone if you can avoid it. If you're interested in this book, I'd be interested to hear that as well in the comments. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. If you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. Hit the bell for notifications, and I will see you next time.